All right, so we're in round 3 of our Check the Frozen Food webinar here. And before us we have some Lean Cuisine. And so I would look at Lean Cuisine and hope that would make me thin and lean. We'll find out if that's the case. Alfredo sauces, by and large, are pretty high in calories, particularly saturated fat. They're made from a combination of a roux and cheese, right? It's basically a bechamel.
Mm-hmm.
And a roux is you take butter, you melt butter, you add in flour, and then you pour cheese into it. It's delicious. But
Basically gravy.
Like gravy, the only difference, you don't add cheese, you add chicken stock.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It says though it only has 7 grams of fat and 330 calories and 3 grams of fiber. So they may have done some culinary magic to keep that fat down. It may not actually really be an Alfredo, so they're kind of marketing it that, and it's not really an Alfredo.
Mm-hmm.
Let's check the back and find out. All right. So, looking at our macronutrients, this one's only got 260 calories, so this is really almost a side. You get right down to it. Only 5 grams of fat, which is pretty magical for an Alfredo. We'll see how they did that in a second. They actually gave us a polyunsaturated and monounsaturated breakdown. 1 gram of monounsaturated fat at 20%. Should be 30, but for frozen food, I'm not complaining. 9 grams of protein, which is shocking because unless there's some chicken in there, I could imagine where it's coming from. Basically no cholesterol, lower in sodium than a lot of other frozen foods, and a good amount of potassium. Potassium, unlike sodium, doesn't raise blood pressure, and potassium is one of the important electrolytes to get. Sodium is too, but very few people don't get enough. And 45 grams of carbohydrates, not surprising since it's pasta. Alright, so let's take a look what we got here. So blanch fettuccine, this is a very basic recipe. Water, semolina, wheat gluten. I mean, pasta is not great to eat on a diet at all. I do like, though, that this is a real pasta. Semolina flour and wheat gluten, which is basically all-purpose flour.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you'd make it at home. So at least it's decent. It's not something really synthetic. Skim milk, which cuts down the fat. Water, and then they have very little cream and soybean oil Romano cheese. So all these ingredients down here they list as 2% or less, which makes the analysis pretty simple. So where does the protein come from? There is a little bit of protein in the flour, although there's not the milk is where it's coming from. So they're making their normally fettuccines Alfredo is made with mostly cream. Cream has 0 protein in it, or next to 0. It's all fat. So the reason that this Alfredo sauce has so much protein is it's coming from skim milk.
Okay.
Skim milk, dairy is a questionable product. It's an inflammatory. It's got digestive issues. It's not the best source of protein, but it's not bad. For, an Alfredo, if it tastes decent, there's nothing wrong with the way that they came up with this. They didn't use something synthetic here. Even looking down, things like lactic acid and citric acid. These are just to create a little bit of taste and acidity to it. They do have some cornstarch in here. Again, that's to kind of give the sauce some viscosity to it. The flour is probably also to make it thicker. And they have some different cheese patterns in here. A lot of these things are thickeners. See, if you tried to make this at home, what would happen is that you would have like a soup instead of like a sauce.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what they did to try to help the ingredients look better is they knew people do look at this 2% or less, and there's a whole lot of ingredients in the 2% or less column, right? And that's not 2% or less total, it's 2% or less each. And so to try to keep everything at 2% or less, they used a lot of the same foods. For example, xanthan gum is a thickener, as is butterfat, The cheeses work as thickeners. The cornstarch works as thickener. The wheat flour, the rice starch. So it probably has more like 10% when you add them all together. And that was an awfully clever way of kind of gaming the food label a little bit. And they had me going initially. And all that really does, those thickeners, is they are a problem because of glycemic index. However, the main ingredient, which is this fettuccine, has the same problem because semolina flour and wheat gluten are still high sugar foods. High sugar foods, but at least there's not the saturated fat, which does help. I would probably say, well, if they had a chicken Alfredo, then we could really see, because if it was white meat chicken, we could see what their Alfredo sauce has without the pasta, because I can't really see exactly how much of these thickeners are in there, because the big source of the carbohydrates is the pasta itself. So good food or bad food? I'd have to say it's a bad food for dieting because the pasta itself cannot easily be rescued. I think this interesting concoction for an Alfredo sauce they made is pretty clever. Normally, you'd see something like 25 grams or 20 grams of fat, calories, going up to 800. Like it's pretty severe, and so they did a good job of cutting that down. But Weight Watchers pasta, it just doesn't really work.
Shouldn't be eating pasta if
Shouldn't
you're trying
be eating. No, it's just too high, and it's just too high in sugar. It's processed too far. If you're doing marathon running or stuff like that, where your sugar tolerance is good, or if you're a naturally skinny person and you can handle sugar without too much problem, sure. But if you're like me and you eat the sugar and you put on the weight right away, I'd sooner look for one of their products with this Alfredo sauce that didn't have something that was so high and having such a high glycemic index to start with.
Right. So, well, something like this, it seems like it would be to satisfy a craving while you're cutting down on calories, but that's kind of one of the things that I would struggle with.
I like it for that. If you're feeling like, all right, I have to have pasta today, right? So you have a controlled volume, and you have it in a sauce, and you know the calories, and it's only 260 calories. So while it does have, mostly bad carbohydrates, it's only 45. So this won't destroy your week in terms of it being a bad choice. If you were going to eat this, I'd recommend eating it right before a workout or right after a workout when your metabolism is the highest, and it'll have a lower net impact. So yeah, if using it for that purpose is fine. Particularly if you split this with your loved one or something, you should get half. Now you're even kind of mitigating the damage because it's split between two people, and that's another way. Although this is kind of more intention for a microwave lunch. You're getting 9 grams of protein, so it's not so bad. But the ratios, should have more for 45 grams should have more 30 grams of protein. And you're not going to get that unless it has tofu or it has salmon or something else, not just pasta. For lunch, that's just not a good idea. And that pretty much concludes our presentation. Thanks for joining us. Hit us up with any questions on Facebook if you have any. Thanks.